Iran didn't just breach the US-Israel air defense grid, they shattered it with an unprecedented barrage of over 700 projectiles. Let that sink in. And none now watch the implications unfold. The attack saw a massive volley of Fateh 3113 and Imad ballistic missiles targeting key strategic installations. Take Nevatim Air Base, for example. This is where Israel's stealth F-35I Adir fleet is housed. The damage reports indicate direct hits on hangar facilities and runways. This isn't just cosmetic. This is about operational capacity. An F-35 requires a specific operational environment, and those facilities are engineered for a reason. Repairs are not quick. The cost to replace or repair one F-35 alone exceeds $100 million, and even a hangar designed to protect it costs tens of millions. The precision demonstrated by these Iranian missiles, particularly the Imad, with its maneuverable re-entry vehicle, means they weren't aiming for empty desert. They were aiming for high-value targets. And stay with me. Consider the U.S. command and control nodes within the region. We are talking about sites that coordinate intelligence sharing, early warning, and response protocols. At least one significant U.S. radar installation in the Negev, a critical component of the early warning system against such attacks, sustained multiple impacts. This system is designed to provide precious minutes of warning. Its incapacitation means a significant reduction in reaction time for future threats. It represents years of joint development and billions in investment. This isn't just about a radar dish. It is about an entire architecture of deterrence. It is about a loss of situational awareness that cannot be easily or quickly restored. And here is the raw math of it all. The cost equation is brutal. Iran fired an estimated 700 missiles and drones. Many of these are simple rockets or drones costing anywhere from a few hundred to a few $1,000s each. Their more advanced Fateh 3113 and Sham ballistic missiles cost perhaps $5,000 to $15,000 apiece to produce. Now compare that to the interceptors. An Iron Dome Tamir missile costs roughly $5,000 per shot. A Patriot missile can be upwards of $3 million. Arrow 3 interceptors are even more expensive, costing several million per launch. The defensive systems were forced to expend billions of dollars in interceptors just to mitigate the impact. This isn't sustainable. It's an economic war of attrition, and one side has an almost infinite supply of cheap projectiles, while the other is burning through its finite and astronomically expensive inventory. The central question that remains unanswered is, how did this happen on such a scale without significant disruption before impact? And quick, before we go further, huge thanks for being here. Your support keeps this running. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Hit turn on notifications. It genuinely helps. Now let's get into it. Most people think a modern air defense shield, especially one jointly developed by the US and Israel, is essentially impenetrable. They believe the layers of Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow systems can intercept almost anything thrown at them. The reality is far more complex and far more dangerous. No defensive system is designed for 100% interception against a truly saturated attack. When you launch 700 projectiles simultaneously, some slow drones, some cruise missiles, some supersonic ballistic missiles, you are intentionally overwhelming the fire control channels. You are forcing the radars to track too many targets. You are forcing the interceptor batteries to deplete their magazines at an unsustainable rate. This isn't about the individual missile effectiveness. It's about the sheer volume of the threat exceeding the system's processing and physical limits. And here's why that gap between perception and reality is the most dangerous thing happening right now. It fundamentally shifts the calculus of regional conflict. It tells every potential adversary that even the most sophisticated layered defense can be broken if you are willing to spend enough on expendable rockets. Here's what that tells you. The cost equation we just discussed is not a theoretical exercise. It represents a physical and economic grind. Imagine if Iran can launch 700 projectiles for, say, $10 to $20 million total and force the defense to spend $2 to $3 billion in interceptors. That is an asymmetric ratio of 1 to 100 or 1 to 200. Over time, such an exchange rate makes defense economically unfeasible. You cannot replace Patriot batteries or Arrow 3 systems as fast as the enemy can mass-produce rudimentary rockets and drones. You cannot sustain a defense budget that is perpetually burning through billions to counter threats costing millions. It drains arsenals, it depletes national reserves, and it impacts the ability to respond to other threats. The sustained cost of defense becomes higher than the cost of multiple offensive attacks. That reality changes everything for military planners and strategists around the globe. Let me be precise about what we know and what we absolutely do not know. What we know is that the targeting was remarkably effective. We know the number of projectiles launched according to satellite intelligence and early warning systems was indeed in the hundreds. We know that critical infrastructure, not just empty fields, took direct impacts. We know that the defensive systems were active for an extended period, expending an enormous number of interceptors. The visible damage reports confirm significant hits to runways, hangars, and at least one radar facility. This isn't conjecture. This is confirmed by multiple intelligence sources and open-source imagery. Chenhua-san, what we do not know is the precise extent of classified systems compromised. We do not know the full casualty count beyond the initial public statements, which are always conservative in such scenarios. We do not know the internal damage assessment for systems that may appear externally intact but suffered internal component failure due to blast concussive force or electromagnetic pulse effects. We do not know the specific intelligence Iran gathered on the shield's vulnerabilities through this attack, whether they were testing specific gaps or validating new tactics. And perhaps most critically, we do not know the long-term operational impact on the F-35 fleet or other high-value assets that were either hit or narrowly missed. The silence around these precise details speaks volumes about the severity of the intelligence vacuum. Now understand what this means for other players on the world stage. China, for instance, is watching this very closely, calculating every single variable. Their strategic thinkers are undoubtedly studying the saturation tactics employed by Iran. They are asking themselves how many missiles and drones would it take to overwhelm U.S. carrier battle groups or Taiwanese air defenses in a cross-strait invasion scenario. This event validates their investment in hypersonic missiles and massive conventional missile stockpiles. It strengthens the argument within the People's Liberation Army for a quantity has a quality all its own approach. The targeting precision, the coordinated multi-vector attack, these are all lessons being absorbed and integrated into their own doctrinal planning. Beijing sees this as a live fire exercise on the limits of Western air defense technology. And meanwhile, Russia is also taking notes. They are assessing the US and Israeli response capabilities. For Moscow, this serves as a critical test of Western resolve and defensive vulnerabilities in a real-world high-stakes environment. They are looking for weaknesses in command and control and intelligence sharing in the logistical tail required to sustain such a high-intensity conflict. They are asking if similar saturation tactics could be employed against NATO defenses in Eastern Europe. The sheer cost to the defenders versus the attackers is a compelling narrative for a Kremlin focused on long-term strategic competition. It potentially offers new avenues for their own asymmetric strategies against more technologically advanced adversaries. And Senshetsnonwan. This is the part no one is saying out loud. The domino chain has already begun. The first tile to fall was the perception of an impenetrable shield. That collapse immediately leads to the second tile, a loss of strategic deterrence. When your adversary knows your defense can be overwhelmed, they are emboldened. This isn't just theory. Regional proxies and non-state actors operating under Iran's influence will now view their own missile capabilities with renewed confidence. This will inevitably lead to an escalation in skirmishes and attacks across the region, knowing that the primary defense layer is not as robust as once believed. The third tile is economic shockwaves. Oil prices will react sharply to this perceived instability and the threat of further escalation. Supply chains will tighten. Global markets will become more volatile. This will impact the price of everything from gasoline at the pump to manufacturing costs worldwide. The fourth tile is political instability, both regionally and domestically within the US and Israel. Questions will be asked about intelligence failures, about defensive preparedness, about the strategic options moving forward. These questions will create rifts. They will weaken leadership. They will fuel resentment. The fifth and final tile is a reevaluation of alliances and security guarantees. Smaller regional partners who relied on the US and Israeli defensive umbrella will now feel exposed. They will begin to look for alternative security arrangements or consider appeasing the new emboldened regional power. The operational mechanism here mirrors something we saw play out in the 1991 Gulf War. During Desert Storm, Iraq launched hundreds of Scud missiles at Israel and Saudi Arabia. While many were intercepted by Patriot batteries, the sheer volume and unpredictable nature of the attacks forced a massive reallocation of resources and created significant political pressure. The Patriot system, despite its successes, was not perfect, and the psychological impact of repeated missile attacks was enormous. The focus then was on defending against a conventional ballistic missile threat with a single-layer system. Today, we are talking about a multi-layered, sophisticated defense, but the principle of overwhelming saturation remains constant. The Scuds forced Israel to consider retaliation. This attack forces the same wrenching choices on a far greater scale with far more precise and destructive weapons. The fundamental vulnerability to a low-cost, high-volume attack remains a persistent challenge for even the most advanced militaries. Now, how many more such attacks can be absorbed before the strategic landscape fundamentally shifts beyond recognition? Now, there are exactly two paths forward from this moment. Path 1 is massive and immediate retaliation. The morning after this path means a new major military conflict in the Middle East. It means US and Israeli forces conducting sustained large-scale strikes against Iranian missile facilities, command centers, and Revolutionary Guard assets. Oil prices would likely spike above $150 a barrel instantly. The Iranian government would rally its population around a narrative of national defense and sacrifice. They would call on every proxy from Lebanon to Yemen to launch coordinated attacks against US and Israeli interests globally. The American president would face a joint session of Congress demanding immediate funding for a prolonged war and potentially authorizing a draft. Gulf states would be caught in the crossfire, their economies and populations immediately at risk. This path leads directly to a region engulfed in fire. Enchan Path 2 is strategic de-escalation and a renewed diplomatic push. The morning after this path means an immediate de-escalation of rhetoric and a concerted international effort to open back channels. It means a scramble to reinforce regional defenses with more advanced and more numerous interceptors. It means intense negotiations, potentially involving third parties like China or Russia, to broker some kind of ceasefire or de-escalation agreement. Oil prices would remain elevated due to uncertainty, but not explode as dramatically. The Iranian government would claim a strategic victory, having demonstrated its capabilities and the vulnerability of its adversaries without triggering full-scale war. The American president would face intense criticism for a perceived weakness, but might secure a precarious peace for the immediate term. Israel would have to consider fundamental changes to its defense posture and potentially its deterrence doctrine, relying more on covert action and less on overt military responses. This path leads to an uneasy and volatile peace where the underlying tensions remain unresolved. The core vulnerability exposed by this event is not just technological, it is strategic. It is about the cost of defense versus the cost of offense. It is about whether a technologically superior force can be defeated not on the battlefield, but in the ledger. The cost equation has now fundamentally shifted the calculus. One side has a strategy built on the limitless production of cheap projectiles. The other has an increasingly expensive and finite shield. The morning after this attack, one side knows the shield can be broken. The other is left with the stark reality that they cannot afford to keep fixing it.